Hello.
Thank you. Ms. Lloyden.
Good afternoon, Chair. We will now hear evidence from Karen Michelle in relation to her sister, Marion Michelle. Please can the witness be sworn?
I was going to affirm, actually. Yeah, that's on there, yeah. I, Karen Michelle, do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Thank you. Please can you state your full name for the record?
Yeah, Karen Ann Michelle.
You are the sister of Marion Michelle, who was born on the 5th of August 1965 and died on the 4th of March 2022 at the age of 56, is that
Yeah.
right? I understand that you would like me to refer to Marion by her first name
Yes.
throughout my questions, and you would like me to call you Karen, is that right?
Yes, please.
By way of background, the inquiry sent a request for evidence to you under Rule 9 of the Inquiry Rules on the 10th of February 2025, and in response to that request, you've prepared a witness statement to the inquiry. Do you have a copy of that statement in front of you?
Yes, I do.
It is dated the 24th of June 2025. If you can turn to page 64 of that statement, that's almost at the back.
Yeah.
Is it right that you made a statement of truth and then signed your witness statement?
Yes, that's correct.
Have you had an opportunity to read that statement through recently?
Yes.
I understand that there is one correction that you wish to make in relation to paragraph 90 of the statement.
Yes, that's correct.
And that is where it says that there was no ward psychologist in post a gap of 11 months. This should in fact say 8 months, is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Aside from that correction, is that document true and accurate to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. And as you know, the witness statement will therefore stand as your evidence of the inquiry, but I'm going to ask you some questions about that statement, and please be assured that the Chair and the inquiry team have read and considered everything you say in your statement very carefully, and it will form part of the body of evidence on which the inquiry will rely.
Yeah.
I would just also like to acknowledge that you've provided a commemorative and impact statement in relation to your sister Marion, and the inquiry is extremely grateful for both that account and also the evidence you're giving today.
Yeah.
Marion was not under the care of Essex Mental Health Services until the end of 2018 when she was 53 years old. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
What I want to do is start by going through with you some earlier details of Marion's mental health because of its relevance to her presentation and the assessments made of her risk when she was later being cared for in Essex.
Yeah.
Marion, I understand, first had contact with mental health services in Jersey in 1984 when she was 19 years old.
Yes, that's correct.
And then some years later in 1998, she was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia.
Yes, that's correct.
In your statement, you set out a number of serious incidents that happened between 1999 and 2003, including an incident in 1999 when Marion stabbed her then partner with a large kitchen knife when he was asleep. Is that right?
Yes.
An incident in 2002 in which Marion stabbed herself in the chest and abdomen using a kitchen knife, and when emergency services arrived, jumped off the balcony of her flat. And a further incident in 2003 when Marion jumped out of the window of her flat.
Yes.
Thereafter, is it right that Marion continued to be under the care of mental health services in Jersey until 2010?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, she had the same psychiatrist for a number of years that she had a very good relationship with. And when he retired shortly after that, she was transferred back to her GP because she was quite stable at that time.
And she'd been on the same medication for a period of time,
Yeah.
Is that right? Moving forward some years then, in 2018, Marion stabbed her then partner and was remanded in custody at Lamoy Prison in Jersey, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And then whilst Marion was remanded in custody at Lamoy Prison, She cut her neck, wrists and feet with a sharp item in her cell, and these injuries required emergency surgery and intensive care treatment at Jersey General Hospital.
Yes.
And it was then, following that treatment, that Marion is transferred from Jersey to Fuji Ward at Brockfield House in Essex.
Yeah, it was the news that she was going to transfer that caused her to do that, because she said she didn't know where she was going and she was scared. And then after that, she was, discharged back to prison, and then she was transferred again on the 20th of December.
Thank you.
Which went without incident this time.
And so once she's back in Lemoy prison in Jersey, she's then transferred all the way to Essex.
Yeah.
For the first time, is this right, that her care and mental health care was not happening on the island of Jersey?
Yeah.
And was this because this had been identified, Brockfield House, as an appropriate specialist forensic secure facility?
Yes.
And there wasn't that
there's
option
nothing
available
like
on the
that.
island of Jersey?
Nothing like that there, no.
I want to just clarify a few points now about Marion's status while she was at Brockfield House from the 20th of December 2018. She was transferred initially for a 12-week inpatient assessment at the unit under the Mental Health Act, is that right?
Yes, and that was as part of court proceedings.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's then extended, and then when the court proceedings finish on 16th of December 2019, she remains at Brockfield House, this time under a Section 37 hospital order.
Yes.
With Section 41 restrictions.
Yes, that's correct.
And so it's from the 20th of December 2018, when Marion is under the care of the Essex Partnership University NHS Foundation Trust, which we'll be calling EPUT. And she remains under EPUT's care until her tragic death on the 4th of March 2022 as a result of multiple self-inflicted stab wounds, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
I want to focus now on what happened at Brockfield House.
Yeah.
But to initially ask you some questions about Marion's diagnosis and risk profile as it was understood by those treating her at Brockfield House. And so whilst she's at Brockfield House, Marion was assessed by Dr. B, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And who did you understand him to be? What was his role?
He was the consultant forensic psychiatrist, and he was the lead clinician, I think they're called, for the multidisciplinary team. So for her ward, I think there were different psychiatrists responsible for different wards within Brockfield House. And he was the lead clinician for her. And he'd been involved in the court proceedings, assessing her in that as well.
And once the Section 37 hospital order is put in place, did you understand him to be the responsible clinician?
Yes, he was, yeah.
And so effectively he was there providing a report every 6 months, is this right?
Yeah, to the Jersey courts, yes.
And he assesses Marion when she first arrives at Brockfield House. And is it right that she also underwent a full psychological examination by a senior psychologist for Fuji Ward, who we'll be referring to as Miss C?
Yes, that's correct.
What involvement, if any, did you have with these assessments?
I spoke to the forensic psychologist at length. She phoned me, arranged a call with me. I didn't speak to the psychiatrist or any other people in that team.
And you explain in your statement that Marion's final diagnosis, which was agreed by Dr. B and Miss C, was that alongside schizophrenia, which was in remission, Marion exhibited traits of emotionally unstable personality disorder of both impulsive and borderline types, although these did not amount to full disorder, is that right?
Yeah, they were seen as traits of them. And it was paranoid schizophrenia, I think, which
yes.
had been in remission for some time before he agreed that it had been remission and controlled by medication for some time before she went to Brockfield House.
Is it right, though, that whilst there was that ultimate agreement on the final diagnosis, that there initially had been some disagreement between Dr. B and Miss C regarding whether Marion was psychotic at the time of stabbing her ex-partner in 2018?
Yes, at first I think Miss C, the psychologist,
Yes.
thought that Marion, because of her lack of difficulties with problem solving, and part of the emotionally unstable personality disorder traits, had sort of got so stressed
Yes.
that had tipped her into psychosis very quickly. So it was this phrase that kept being used as a quick relapse to psychosis. They both agreed that in 1999, in the incident where she stabbed her then partner, that she had been psychotic, and I saw her and she was psychotic.
Yes.
But in 2018, the psychiatrist thought that this was more to do with the emotionally unstable personality disorder traits,
Yes.
and sort of stress, but he didn't think she was psychotic. He didn't think there was any evidence that she became psychotic. So they disagreed about that. But in the end, the psychologist did agree towards the end of proceedings that Dr. B was correct, and she sort of acquiesced to his view.
That's Miss C.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And so ultimately, some months later, at the close of the criminal proceedings, the final diagnosis is agreed between them, and there's a joint understanding, originally Dr. B's and then joint, that Marion was not psychotic in 2018.
But that's not what the reports that still existed said. That was
Yes.
something that happened in court.
Can you tell us a little bit about, despite this agreement, your understanding that there was some confusion from those staff treating Marion over this period at Brockfield House as to what to expect if she were to relapse?
Yeah, well, there was I think because I didn't know any of this before Marion died, and having access to the inquest bundle.
Yes.
But I just kept reading the discrepancy, and I saw like in, things that nurses had written, that they would cut and paste this quick relapse to psychosis. And the second psychologist she had, I can't remember what he's referred to as, Mr. D. He, in his statement to the inquest, actually said that she was psychotic. It was commonly agreed by the multidisciplinary team that she was psychotic in 2018. So it just, and the investigators that did the investigative report after she died also referred to this. So it was I picked it up, they didn't pick it up. It just seemed to be very confusing. And then I thought, well, how did the staff know whether, Marion being unwell was going to look like her being psychotic or look like nothing was happening? And in fact, on the day she died, according to evidence that the staff there that day, one said she'd expected her to be psychotic and aggressive, and the other one said she expected her to be quiet. So it was really a bit of a mess, and quite concerning that, someone in this specialist resource, where there'd been a disagreement in the court process, I think the staff had then used, because the original psychologist was brilliant, she was excellent, and they had probably had access to her report maybe more than they had, because it was a psychological assessment, it wasn't a report written for court. So maybe they had access to her report, and they didn't have access to Dr. B, and he didn't ever seem to actually put that right.
Yes.
Throughout the whole time. And he was one of the people that had known Marion from before she even went to Brockfield House. So he had known her the longest. He had been there through the court process, but he never seemed to correct this misunderstanding about how, what the cause was from the 2018 incident.
But if he had not exactly prevailed, his diagnosis had not been evident to the staff because of this confusion. The issue, I think, is whether she might have appeared as psychotic at the time of being unwell, doing things that were as a sign to look out for.
Yeah.
But if he had not corrected that, then they wouldn't be looking for
I think there was confusion.
Sign of psychosis.
There was confusion. Because he was saying she wasn't psychotic, and the psychologist was saying that she was. She had tipped into psychosis through stress. So it was a confusing picture.
And I think you say in your statement that although there was this ultimately agreed position and final diagnosis, that you consider that information about the nature of Marian's past relapses was not effectively relayed to staff.
No, I don't think it was.
And would Dr. B have been somebody, as you understand it, who was part of that multidisciplinary team?
Well, he was the head of that team, which met every 2 weeks at ward round, so it really should have been his job, and especially once Miss C left, which was in September 2020, because then she wasn't there to say, well, actually, that's wrong.
Yes.
You know, he would have been the only person involved in those court proceedings that knew that that sort of went on. And I'm sure that must happen in a lot of court proceedings where experts don't agree. And obviously everyone at Brockfield House has been through some court process to get there.
And so would you say that this is something where better record keeping, or indeed greater work from Dr. B to correct the position should have happened?
It should have happened, and it also showed in the investigation report, because they didn't even mention what Marian's diagnosis was, really, especially the emotionally unstable personality disorder traits.
You also mentioned that this may have impacted on Marian's own understanding of her mental health and past harmful actions if the staff treating her were not clear.
I think it probably did.
I want to come now to ask you about your knowledge of the physical environment of Brockfield House. Before I do, just to remind you not to mention any staff names.
Sorry.
Not to worry. I will try and refer by role to assist as well. I want to ask you about your knowledge of the physical environment at Brockfield House. So Marian first arrived on the 20th of December 2018. At that stage, how often were you able to visit her at that ward, Fuji ward?
I think the issue was my distance. I was almost a two-hour
Yes.
drive away, and I could go for an hour. So I think I was trying to go sort of once a fortnight on a Saturday. Sometimes there were longer gaps, but generally I was trying to go once a fortnight. So it started for an hour visit, actually on Fuji ward.
And what was your impression of the building itself, the facilities?
It was very positive, because it was built for purpose. I think the 10-year anniversary or something of it being built was when Marian was there. So it was quite an impressive building. And as I say, it'd been built for that purpose, to be a forensic secure unit. So a lot of thought had gone into the design. And it was, it was relatively new. And the staff on reception, the reception area was nice, very welcoming. And there was a room specifically for visitors on the ward, and there was visitor toilets. So it was quite good, well thought out. And there was an airlock to go into it, as you'd expect, because obviously people weren't allowed out, or Marian wasn't allowed out at that stage.
And then turning to Fuji ward in particular, can you describe for us what Fuji ward was like when you visited it, and what your impression was of the ward?
Yeah, I mean, it was quite a nice environment. Obviously, there weren't chairs that you could pick up and throw. It was sort of all designed, sort of inbuilt stuff. We went in the dining room sometimes if there was another visitor, and that was quite nice. There was a garden area. The sort of bedrooms went off 2 corridors. I didn't see Marion's bedroom, but yeah, as I say, it was sort of well kept. Marion used the garden a lot in the summer. And there was activities on the ward. I think there was a sensory room which the women there had helped to set up with staff. So, yeah.
And in terms of your observations of how staff were interacting with patients during your visits to Fuji Ward, what was your impression of the relationships with staff on Fuji Ward?
Well, I didn't sort of see that many. I did see staff around and
Yes.
coming and going because the visitor room was right at the entrance to the ward. So if I was there, they'd be coming and going and taking people to different places, and they were always very friendly. Marion had, some good relationships with staff there. I think one was going to Jersey, so Marion had been sort of telling her where to go. And so, yeah, I think, from what I could tell when I went there, it was fine. And sometimes when Marion was allowed to have perimeter leave, ground leave in the grounds, I met staff there, like a key worker who seemed very nice, and I know Marion thought highly of her.
And in terms of, and you may not be able to comment on this, but did it seem to you that patients were listened to and engaged with by staff, from what Marion told you or what you observed?
Yeah, I think, I don't know all the details, but I think the room that I sat in had, like you said, we did, on the wall.
Yes.
And I think you could see that some things had been listened to. And because women were there for years on this ward, so it wasn't like someone was going to come up with an idea and then go away again. They were going to still be there saying the same thing,
Yes.
in months' time. So I think they genuinely did have to work with people. And I think mobile phones might have been one of those things which did happen while Marion was there. And I can't remember if it was because of COVID or not, but it sort of transitioned from having to phone a ward phone in the middle of the ward, like
Yes.
a pay phone, to actually people having their own mobile phone, which was obviously much better.
And in terms of the activities, you've touched upon there being a sensory room. What activities were there available to Marion? While she was
On
on board?
Fuji Ward, there was a lot. The occupational therapy service had a lot of different activities. They did cooking, they did, education. There was a whole education thing where you could do different qualifications, which Marion did. There was ladies' morning, I think it was called, and book clubs and, going to the gym or doing exercise. So on Fuji Ward, because a lot of women there couldn't go out,
Yes.
there was a lot of things based on that ward or within the wider building.
I want to ask you now what your impression was of whether Fuji Ward was safe and whether Marion felt safe there. What was your sense as to whether this was a safe place?
I think when she first went there, it was quite settled. I think a lot of the women had been there for quite a long time, so it was quite a settled group. That was the impression I got. And then I think, during sort of the start of COVID and things, that sort of did, or sort of as time went on, that did change as people were discharged or moved to other wards. There was a lot more very unwell women there. And some of the more stable women relapsed and, were very unwell. So I think then it didn't feel so safe. But Marion sort of had the key to her room, so she just knew to make herself scarce. But also, what was I going to say? Can't remember, sorry.
Don't worry. And was it your impression that the times of perhaps Marion feeling unsafe or a new patient coming on to the ward were the sort of inevitable consequences of this kind of facility, but that staff were taking it seriously and dealing with it well, or that there were problems in the way it was being handled?
No, I think from what I recall, staff did deal with incidents, but I think there was a knock-on effect on the staff themselves, because I think also a lot of staff, there was a bit of a churn of some staff moving agency, because it was 6. There should have been 6 staff, I think, for 12 women on that ward.
I see.
But that was because some people sometimes needed one-to-one observation, 24/7, or even 2-to-1 observation.
Yes.
So that would then take up staff, and if they were short of staff, that impacted on the women that were more stable, because they couldn't be taken out to the grounds, they couldn't be taken up to a room to do something else, because there just simply wasn't the staff. And that became quite limiting for Marion, because she was quite stable, that, as time went on, she was being quite restricted by the fact that she was on this assessment ward because of the needs of other women. That's just was kind of the nature of the ward. But I know there were times when agents, she said to me, like, they can't get any agency staff to work on this ward because I think staff were being assaulted. So I guess word spreads, doesn't it? I guess it's the kind of who how much choice places have to choose who they're going to take in, especially during COVID, and they're taking women from prison.
Yes.
I don't know what choices they had, or whether they just had to take people.
And I think you say in your statement that anecdotally there seemed to be more sickness absence at these times when there were particularly, I think you described them as challenging or aggressive patients. Is that right?
Yeah. I do remember one staff member who actually, Marion couldn't go out. She was sort of building up to going into the community on her own, and you need to do a certain amount of escorted trips out. And this one staff member actually did offer to use, when she normally went for a walk in her break, she said, I'll take Marion. And she took her for this, what should have been her break. So some staff did go above and beyond, but, that most of the time things got cancelled. But as I say, that changed throughout the time Marion was there. And obviously, when Marion was first there, she didn't have any leave. So it's a changing picture.
And I think you also explained that Marion was asked to move rooms on a few occasions. Why was that?
I think that was to help staff manage kind of when there were issues between women, to break people up. And Marion was quite compliant.
Yes.
And you could kind of reason with her. She's not going to probably say no. So I think really that nature was a bit, it was unfortunate that she, sometimes the rooms were better than the rooms she'd been in, and sometimes she didn't like them. But, because she'd said yes and been persuaded to move. But really, by the end, I think it was maybe 3 or 4 times.
That she'd moved rooms?
Yeah. I think I was a bit feeling that, that was a bit much, really.
Can I be clear, was this during the COVID period, or was this before COVID actually started?
December 2018, so she was there for about a year and a bit before lockdown. And then obviously she was there throughout the whole of COVID.
So, but these changes you noticed in terms of the acuity of people coming into the place?
Yeah, I think it definitely got worse.
Over COVID?
Yeah, definitely.
And she doesn't transfer to Aurora Ward, which we're going to come to in a moment, until the 16th of September 2021.
Yeah.
So she was on Fuji Ward for quite some time.
Yeah. And it was longer because of COVID, really, because everything got delayed. Obviously, people couldn't go and do the leave and things that they, she would have progressed probably quicker, but COVID, so.
So she's on Fuji Ward for approaching 3 years.
Yeah.
So quite a long time for staff to get to know her and her to develop relationships. She's then transferred to Aurora Ward on the 16th of September 2021, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And this was a ward, is this right, that was used to prepare and assess patients for discharge?
Yes.
And this transfer was part of Marian's original care plan and had been agreed by the Ministry of Justice and the Jersey authorities?
Yes. That had been agreed at the end of the court case, that was the path. Some women went to another ward, which was a low secure ward called Causeway, but Marian's, I think they wanted to check because Aurora, you had more freedom, I think.
Yes.
So, and you were expected to go out every day. You were expected to, join in community things, maybe have a voluntary job and things like that. So it was preparation for discharge.
And before the transfer took place, there were about 2 weeks of daily visits to Aurora Ward, is that right? And you say in your statement this is slightly longer than the usual schedule of visits to the new ward due to Marian's history.
That's what Marian told me, that the Dr. B, the psychiatrist, had told her that he wanted her to have a longer transition to the new ward, which I kind of, felt reassured by, that they were taking into account what had happened at prison, that transitions for her could be difficult, and change in general. So I was quite reassured hearing her tell me that. And she did do that. It's sort of, you go for a few hours and then you have a meal, then, it sort of builds up gradually.
And how did you become aware that Marian was being transferred to Aurora Ward?
I think it had been talked about at the Section 117 meetings, that was her plan, but I don't think anyone specifically contacted me to say it was all through Marian. And most of what I know is through what Marian told me, not a professional.
And the Section 117 meetings, those were the 6 monthly meetings, were they?
Care programme approach meetings.
And you've said that most of what you learnt was through Marian. As far as you're aware, was there anything to suggest Marian didn't consent for information to be shared with you by staff?
No, not that I'm aware of.
And you were in those 6 monthly meetings and contributing and hearing information through those, is that right?
And they were sort of, I did attend in person pre-COVID, but after COVID they just kept them virtual, so it was always a virtual meeting. Obviously the people that worked at Brockfield House and Marian would be in one room, but I would be joining them virtually.
I want to ask now just about the physical environment of Aurora Ward, where Marian was detained for almost 6 months, so from the 16th of September 2021 until her death on the 4th of March 2022. Can you tell us a little bit about Marian's living arrangements on this ward in particular?
Yeah, I never visited the ward and I was never asked to go there, and obviously by that time I was able to go and pick Marian up and we were going out. So I never visited her on the ward. The only time I went was to collect her possessions after she died.
Yes.
So that was the first time I saw her room, which was a lovely room with a view of the sort of fields and things. So within the ward, as I understand it, was a series of flats, so 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom and 3 bedroom flats.
Yes.
And there were also a communal area, kind of a bit similar to Fuji Ward, with like a lounge area. So within the flats, people would have their own bedroom, lounge, kitchen and bathroom as well. And they'd have the key to that flat. And she was really looking forward to going to Aurora Ward because she saw it as sort of moving towards discharge.
Yes.
But also 2 friends that she'd made, they were all sort of vying to get onto Aurora Ward at the same time so that they could share one of these flats. So it did work out in the end, and the 3 of them did share a flat and they did sort of cooking together and stuff. And then one of them unfortunately relapsed, so she moved wards, and the 2 of them then were together, so they moved to a 2-bedroom flat. But it is sort of they've got their own flat, but Marion's flat, the door sort of came out onto the staff office. So it's a bit weird to explain. And they also had like outside areas, but they weren't ones that you could, they were sort of enclosed outside areas, sort of designed so no one could hurt themselves, but they could have some fresh air.
So with safety in mind, but
Yeah.
it was approaching what it might be like to live in a flat
And it was
outside.
towards the front of the building, sort of above the reception area, so...
And I think it's originally the patients that we will be referring to, patient T and patient C, that Marion is in a 3-bedroom flat with, and then a 2-bedroom flat with patient C thereafter. What did you understand from Marion, or from what you've learnt since, as to Marion's routine while she was on Aurora Ward?
I think she'd get up in the morning. They were expected to clean the flat, I think, like a bleach tablet, and they had to wash the floors and things. And then they'd have the morning meeting, I think probably about 9 or 9:30, which the staff would relay to them any information they needed, sort of housekeeping issues. And of relevance to Marion was like the COVID lockdowns, when they might end if they were happening.
Yes.
And then that people could go out according to if they had a section. They all had like signed sections, paperwork. So I think Marion was allowed to go to Wickford 2 or 3 times a week, which is the nearest sort of town, to go shopping. And she used to go swimming, go to the local gym, and, you know, things like that. So, and they were looking at voluntary work for her as well. Some people did voluntary work. So everyone kind of more or less went out most days.
Yes.
So.
And then in terms of engagement with Marion, is it your understanding that she was involved in her care plans and planning for her care?
Yes, I think she was, through the fortnightly ward rounds. I think the idea is the key worker has a meeting with the patient. They discuss what she wants to bring up at ward round of every fortnight, which was normally things like, I need a section signed because I'm going to see my sister.
Yes.
Or I want to do this. And anything else, any health issues or referrals that she wanted. So she was used to that process, and it seemed to work quite well.
And then in terms of you've explained that the more formal care programme approach meetings, the Section 117 meetings, took place every 6 months.
Yeah.
And you were engaged in those meetings. How informative and constructed did you find these meetings?
Yeah, they were fine. Everyone just gave a report, like the
Yes.
OT, the key worker, and it was kind of what I'd expect it to be, really.
And then outside of those meetings, what contact did you have with ward staff?
I didn't have any contact with ward staff or the key worker. The only person that contacted me was the social worker. Marion had a social worker. And the original one used to contact me quite a lot. And then he went on secondment, I think, and I got this. She got another social worker who was a very experienced forensic social worker, but she didn't really contact me very much at all, only when absolutely sort of necessary, whereas I think the other one used to just sort of check in from time to time. Nobody ever asked, like, how did your visit go? There didn't seem to be any sort of feedback loop.
And so the social worker, is that right, would have been attending the multidisciplinary team meetings.
Yeah.
And so when there was that social worker who reached out and had regular contact, you were given a lot of information. Would that be fair?
Well, I think he used to just generally check in, whether it was because it was a different stage of the process and she was on Fuji ward. I don't know whether it was just different styles. But for example, I've read since Marion died that the social worker had thought in January 2022 that Marion was completely clueless about what living in a supported housing environment was going to be.
Yes.
And that she was just focused on the fact that it was where I live and the place it was going to be. But that was complete news to me when I read it.
And so,
Because this was never mentioned to me, and nothing, I haven't read anything in the notes, and I've had all the notes for the last 6 months Marion was alive, that suggested anyone discussed that with her, even though they'd written it down, and they discussed it at MDT. I think it was in the January, when, or the end of December, possibly 29th or something. There was that wasn't fed back to me, you know. And when I suggested Marion should come and live near me rather than return to Jersey, again, you know, no one sort of discussed with me what that would be like, or despite Marion giving permission to the social worker on the 11th of February, she hadn't phoned me.
and so is this
About
right?
the accommodations. She never got in contact. In fact, when she phoned to say Marion had hurt herself, I said, oh, great. You know, I said, oh, great, thanks for phoning. I just was going to ask you about the accommodation.
We will come to
So,
what was communicated to you after Marion's death, but is it right that in terms of the discharge plan for Marion,
yeah.
that there had been discussion between you and Marion of whether or not she might want to live near where you lived,
Yeah.
rather than going back to Jersey?
Yeah. I felt she'd be isolated in Jersey because my parents are elderly and she lived to an annex of their house and they've got their own. So it's kind of, it felt to me that it would be better for her to sort of start anew, and she didn't really have any friends in
Yes.
Jersey, so it wasn't like this existing community she was returning to.
And in terms of the discussion that you had, I think you say in your statement that you've raised this and then you understood from Marion that that was the new plan for discharge.
Yeah.
And you've touched on this, but to what extent was there any contact from those who were considering her discharge with you?
Well,
from
there
ward
just
staff?
wasn't really.
So there
That
was
just became the plan, and one of the other issues, which you'll probably, you know, there wasn't any relapse prevention planning done, and the you know, in a timely way, in my, you know, view,
Yes.
because discharge was being discussed. She was meant to be meeting with this supported housing, which was, you know, going to be a stressful event for Marion,
Yes.
but
and we'll,
there'd been no, you know, discussion with her or myself about it.
I want to come to that in a moment. What I just want to touch on first of all is the therapeutic care that she
Yeah.
received, and the medication that she was receiving. I think you explained that in relation to Marion's paranoid schizophrenia, medication was the main treatment.
Yeah,
Is that right?
and she'd been on the same medication for many years.
Yes. And the responsible clinician for Marion at Eput's Brockfield House was Dr. B. And you say in your statement that your impression was that he had a very good understanding of Marion's mental health history, risk factors, and the plan for how she could be treated at Brockfield House. Is that right?
Yes, he seemed to have.
And the main treatment for her emotionally unstable personality disorder traits was DBT, so dialectical behaviour therapy.
Yes.
What was your understanding of what that treatment consisted of?
It was a series of, I think, 4, I don't know what they were, distress tolerance, mindfulness, I can't remember the other 2, but it was like a form of CBT, but for people. It's a known way of working with therapeutic approach for people with personality disorders.
Yes.
And it was very well established there. They had a very good program, but alongside people attending groups and completing these 4 sections, and there was probably a week or 2 break in between, they also had one-to-one with the psychologist, the ward psychologist. So Marion did have that up until the first psychologist left, and then she didn't have it again after that. Even
Yes.
when the new psychologist came, she didn't kind of get that level of
And so those were
involvement.
regular sessions, one-to-one.
Yeah, I think it was weekly.
Weekly sessions.
Yeah.
And then there's a period, is this right, of about 8 months where there is nobody in post
Yeah.
as a psychologist on the ward. And then a locum Mr. D
Yeah.
becomes the psychologist.
Yes.
But is it right that effectively there wasn't then consistent weekly sessions of one-to-one thereafter?
No, I think he was supposed to be picking up the sort of gaps that were still there, but in the event, Marion suggested something to him and they did that instead.
And is this the work around her index
Self-forgiveness.
fence?
Yeah.
The self-directed work in relation to
Yeah.
self-forgiveness. And that was in relation to the
Her
attack.
assault.
The assault,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah, on her ex-partner, yeah.
And I think you mentioned later on in your statement that Marion was going to meet up with the ex-partner towards the end of 2021.
Yeah.
Do you know whether that work had been planned in preparation for that meeting?
No, I think he just randomly phoned and said he was in the UK and
I see.
and it's sort of then,
Yes. So it was a coincidence of timing rather
yeah.
than being built up to.
yeah.
One
Unfortunately, that seemed to take the place of discharge planning. It was kind of just that then. And although they kept saying it'll be done by February, it never happened and no one seemed to pick that up.
And so this is the relapse prevention plan, is
Yeah.
that right? So that had originally been due to be completed by February 2021.
No, 2022.
2022,
Yeah.
thank you. And so that didn't, in fact, get completed.
No, they were I think the idea was they would then just do that afterwards, after she'd finished this self-forgiveness. But to me, it was quite pressing because she was quite deep into looking at places to live, having meetings and discussions. So, and because of what happened when she was in prison, it felt actually she did, looking back anyway, obviously, it feels like that should have happened.
And so you think more time and earlier
Yeah.
that the relapse
well, especially
prevention...
given that it seemed to be recorded that she didn't have a clue.
Yes.
She didn't have any concept of what it was going to be like. This was the first time she'd lived independently, for many years because she'd had a partner for over 20 years. This was quite a big deal for her, but, that didn't seem to be taken into account.
And then another element of treatment was the occupational therapy services-led activities, for which, is this right, there was a therapeutic timetable on the ward. What was your overall view of the occupational therapy?
Yeah, that seemed very good. And again, the staff, two of the staff in particular, the senior OT, and they were consistent throughout the whole time Marion was there. They knew Marion very well.
Yes.
Her likes and dislikes. So yeah, I was positive about the OT.
And then you outline in your statement that Marion had a number of physical health needs. What was your impression of the approach taken to physical health while she was at
Yeah, that was very positive. They had a doctor, and if she reported any health needs, that did, she could see the doctor, and they made referrals on if they couldn't deal with it themselves. So it was very positive.
And that was a physical health doctor that was based at Brockfield House?
I think so, or it was a duty doctor sort of system.
Yes. I want to ask you now specifically about your experience regarding Marion's key worker, which you describe in your statement as mixed.
Yeah.
What was your impression of Marion's key worker whilst she was at Fuji Ward?
Well, as I say, I only met her in passing on when I was having a picnic with Marion in the grounds on a visit. But Marion spoke very highly of her.
Yes.
And I think I read Marion was having a wobble once, something to do with her ex-partner, and she'd actually confided in her, which I thought, that is quite a big deal for Marion. So she must have felt confident in her. And I remember Marion laughing because with the new psychologist, Marion was getting fed up that he was sort of going over her background and things like that. And she just wanted to get on with, heading towards discharge sort of thing. And the key worker sort of brought that up at the ward round, which not everyone would they, necessarily, given he was sitting there as well. So I felt that she was a good advocate for Marion. But on Aurora ward,
Yes.
I felt the key worker hardly knew her, and gave evidence that, she didn't even think that patient C was Marion's friend.
That was the patient she was living with.
Yeah,
in the
they'd
flat.
been friends for years. So I just felt like she didn't have the same quality about her as a mental health nurse. But also, I suppose then you have to query that this is a more risky environment, and actually you haven't got anyone that's got that solid, when you move wards, you go from someone that knows you very well to someone that doesn't know you, but you are going out into the community. But then on the other hand, obviously patients aren't on the ward as much on that ward, so there could be less time to get to know them.
And do you think there might have been some element of wanting to give people more independence?
There could have been, yeah, and maybe it wasn't such a big deal for Marion at that time, I don't know. But I know she did say to me, that she didn't really click with her.
And I think you say in your statement that this was a key worker who worked mainly nights. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, although I think when I did check that, I don't think she did always work nights, but maybe that was the time that she had, half an hour to go through things with Marion, I don't know. But I don't think they really had any rapport.
Yes.
So that, that wasn't so positive.
And in terms of the contact that you had, beyond that one meeting in passing with the original key worker, did you have any direct contact with the key worker or the subsequent psychologist, Mr. D?
No, I didn't.
I just want to turn now to just ask what your understanding was. I think you say in your statement you didn't make any complaints at the time, but what was your understanding as to whether if there was a concern you had as a family member, how you could raise that?
I think it would be probably through the social worker. I think I was sent some information at the start, but it was directed at patients.
Yes.
How patients could make complaints.
I see.
So it wasn't really about how you could make a complaint.
I want to turn now to ask about your concerns regarding the assessment of risk on both Fuji and Aurora wards. What did you understand to be the general approach to determining whether Marion could have items like shoelaces or razors at Brockfield House?
I think that was determined at ward round.
Yes.
And obviously I didn't know all the ins and outs. I knew that Marion was couldn't have shoelaces for quite a long time.
Yes.
And I'd see her wearing Converse but without laces. She was getting fed up of that. But after, she could ask and it would be granted, but it was only really at the inquest that I found out that originally they'd said that she shouldn't have quite a few items until after the court case was over.
Yes.
But then she seemed to have been given those items with Dr. B's knowledge, and it had obviously been agreed somewhere, but there was no record found. The counsel for EPA looked through the records one evening of the inquest and couldn't find any record of why that decision changed for her to be given those items sooner.
And
so there didn't seem to be any sort of record of we were saying that, but we now thought this, and the reasons for it are this, that, and the other that you would expect. They just didn't exist.
And so there are items that were considered of potential risk to Marion, and you have concerns now that either there wasn't record keeping of those decisions being made, or they were being given to her before decisions had been made. Is that right?
No, I think decisions were made, but they just weren't recorded.
They haven't been recorded.
Yeah.
I want to turn now to your concerns regarding the adequacy of risk assessments in relation to Sharps specifically. Marion underwent a Sharps assessment on the 7th of June 2019 whilst she was on Fuji ward, is that right?
Yeah, and that's correct.
And that was before she started doing any self-catering?
That was so she could start doing, I think about once a week, the OT would buy ingredients. She'd decide what she wanted, like spaghetti bolognese, and they'd go and buy the ingredients, and then they'd be with her in the kitchen. So she had to do this knife. It was literally cutting a butternut squash.
Yes.
That's what she had to do, and that's what the assessment was. It was a functional assessment. Could she use a knife? And that was it. Obviously, I didn't know this, but I've subsequently read that that was the only assessment Marion had about having access to knives.
And so as against an assessment that might look at whether Marion was safe unsupervised having knives,
Yeah.
this was about functionally, was she safe to cook in a kitchen?
Yeah. And also, it came up at the inquest that the OT that was cooking with her was locked in the kitchen with her with a knife, and there was no assessment of whether that was safe for the staff member either.
I see.
Because it was all about, could she cook? Could she use a knife to cut things with?
And so this was a generic risk assessment.
For the whole of Brockfield House.
And was that a risk assessment that you understand was conducted by the OT, the occupational therapist?
Yes.
And you identify in your statement that a major change for Marion after she transferred to Aurora Ward was that she would have unsupervised access to knives.
Yeah, which I didn't know till after her death.
At or before the point of transferring to Aurora Ward, did an assessment of the risk of Marion having unsupervised access to knives or sharps take place?
No, they just relied on this functional assessment that the OTs had done. And I believe, I remember reading somewhere that it was on a different system. So the staff couldn't even really access it. They just knew it had happened. And that was good enough for them on Aurora Ward. So in a way, you kind of think, were they safe? Was the person
Yes.
Marion was sharing a flat with safe? Because no one had assessed any of these risks. It was just literally, can you cut a vegetable?
And so the fact of there having been a risk assessment is shared, but the
Yeah.
detail of that and the nature of that.
Yeah, I mean, there was the HCR 20, I think it's called, which is a forensic risk assessment, which was updated every 6 months.
Yes.
But that, I never saw that. That's never been provided to me. But that, I don't think that went into detail about, you know, access to knives and things like that in, like, where are we at now? It was just, this had been custom and practice at Brockfield House, obviously probably since it opened, and nobody had sought to think that this was a little bit odd.
So can I just understand this? You're concerned about what was actually done at some stage on the ward to try and identify whether or not Marion was safe to use a knife. And
Yeah.
you say that that was based solely on whether she could actually, as you say, functionally
Yeah.
use a knife. But you did refer earlier to there being risk assessment about her access to knives, which
Well,
had not
risk
been...
assessment to sharps, I would say things like to have, you know, a razor, shave her legs and things, and other sharp items,
And that-
or glass items like face creams in glass things. You know, it was things like that.
And that had concluded she was safe to, but
Well, it hadn't been, and there was
hadn't
no,
been recorded, you say.
it hadn't been recorded. She was given access to those things, but there was no record of why she was given access to those things at the time she was given access to them.
So you don't know whether there was any risk assessment about those either?
No,
Thank you.
that was just the process that, you know, that there was, that gradually you know, could have more access to things, but
I
in
think
her
you
case.
refer in your statement as well to a risk profile completed by the key worker. As far as you're aware, did that document or any other risk assessment look at the risk arising from Marion's history of using sharps against herself and others?
no. And I don't think staff were that aware on the day that she died that that was an issue for Marion.
And so as you understand it, in terms of the extent to which there had been an assessment of Marion's individual risk in relation to knives and sharps because of her history, what's your current impression from the evidence you heard at the inquest and from
Well, it was
before?
completely inadequate. You know, the fact that anyone could move to a different ward and just overnight go from not having only having supervised access to knives to having unsupervised. They could just ask for a knife and be given it. And there was no, it was the fact they changed wards, that it wasn't to do with any risk assessment of the individual. It was just a carte blanche for everyone.
And at Marion's inquest, the jury concluded that in the context of her history of self-harm and violence directed at others, including the use of knives, that there was an absence of a focused risk assessment with respect to her having unsupervised access to knives, both prior to her transfer and following her transfer to a rural ward. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
And that both of those omissions possibly contributed significantly to her death.
Yes.
I just want to ask a few questions, and then it may be a good moment to take a break, about...
Can I be clear?
Yes, of course.
Those observations, as I understand it from the statement, says that the matters in question possibly made a significant...
Yes, possibly. Sorry.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Thank you.
In relation to the HRC 20 risk assessment you mentioned, is it also right that EPUT's patient safety incident investigation report found that that was last updated in August 2021, when it should have been updated again in February 2022?
February, yes, that's correct.
And again noted as an area of concern the lack of a sharps assessment. I want to just understand the process of beyond the risk assessment when Marion would be issued with sharps, including knives, on a rural ward, what you understand to have been the monitoring system or the process that took place when she attended to the office, say, and asked for a knife. What would happen?
Well, there was produced a few days or a week before the inquest was a signing out sheet.
Yes.
Which showed a handful of entries of everyone that had had a sharp issue, it could be a razor or whatever, on that ward. And going back some months, there was only about 10 entries for a ward of 12 people who were all self-catering. And the police had mentioned that in their report for the inquest as well, that, you know, very few signed out. Very few sharp items had been signed out in a number of months. And then staff said, well, we didn't always record it. So again, it was custom and practice to issue knives, and people could say there was 3 different sizes. They could say whatever size they wanted. Staff said they relied on this 2019 assessment that had been done. And obviously, if someone was behaving aggressively, they would have said something.
Yes.
But if, you know, all things being equal, they would just issue them and they wouldn't always record it. But I feel that, again, completely unsafe. Where was the auditing of this? You know, and they didn't seem to have a process for it, but this must have been going on a long time. But also it was a missed opportunity because it showed that on the 3 occasions Marion was issued with a knife, apparently, that they actually did write down. She always returned it within like 15 to 30 minutes of cooking something.
And so there was a clear pattern.
There was a clear pattern, but again, they had a policy of, you know, they didn't come to collect the knife. The person brought it back to them. But this was all in the context where there was no risk assessment based on people's background and their crimes, I guess you could say, of knife use. So I feel, you know, when I saw that, I thought, well, the staff have been at risk here. You know, potentially there's a lot of unknown risk on a rural ward that no one seems to have worried about.
And then is it right that at that time EPUT had a daily security nurse system in place?
Yeah, so the person that issued the knife wasn't the one that necessarily signed it out. That was whoever was nominated to be the daily security nurse. And I guess that's maybe where this system fell down. And I mean, I never formally asked the question in the inquest, but I kind of asked why on the day she died, was it recorded?
Yes.
Or was it recorded afterwards? I
Yes.
don't know.
And was it the practice, as you understand it, to ask any questions about why the patient wanted to take out a knife?
I think they did sort of, you know, I'm cooking lunch or something like that. But on the day Marion died, you know, she hadn't been to the shop since the 8th of February. This was 16 days into a lockdown, and the staff were cooking the meals. And she asked for a large knife. And, you know, what did she have that was fresh to actually cook? It felt like autopilot, really, that people, you know, people were so busy, the staff were so busy, all the patients were on the ward instead of being off the ward. There was only 2 of them, that actually they were just on autopilot. They weren't, you know, and when the person who found Marion came into the flat and called her name, she was coming to ask if she wanted to have an omelette, which was providing lunch.
Yes.
Even though Marion was saying she was cooking her own lunch. So there was a lot of discrepancies that just seemed to be, you know, probably busy staff that just weren't thinking, but it's a worry given the nature of that unit and that client group, isn't it? It's not something you would expect.
Yes, I think if now is a convenient moment, we'll take a break and then afterwards come back to discussing the changes in the weeks leading up to the 4th of March. Chair, is now a convenient moment?
Yes, it is. Thank
you. 10-minute break.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
You're right.
Karen, just before I turn to changes that happened in the weeks leading up to the 4th of March 2022, in terms of the approach Dr. B took to allowing Marion to have certain items, you describe a time in your statement when he had allowed Marion to order a DVD of Killing Eve and your concerns about that. What was your concerns in relation to that?
Well, Marion just said to me, because she had to, on Fuji Ward, I think, ask for different DVDs, and then the doctor would say if she could have it or not. But obviously Killing Eve is about someone that uses knives to hurt people and kill people. So he said, Marion said to me, I wouldn't allow some people to have this, but you're okay. And I felt that was a very strange decision. I didn't do anything about it, but I just felt that just seemed odd to me. And also going back to when she hurt her partner in 1999, that was after, part of the run-up to the incident was that they'd watched a violent, I think it was Angel Heart or something, a violent DVD. I mean, I didn't know that at the time, she told me, but when I read about it since she's died, it sort of increased my concern that it seemed to be very odd decisions were being made, potentially, or what was the reason? And I don't think that was probably ever recorded, but I don't know.
Turning now to what you talk about happening in the weeks leading up to Marion's death on the 4th of March, you outline in your statement that Marion was impacted by a number of changes which had a cumulative effect, raising her stress levels to such an extent that she fatally self-harmed on the 4th of March. So I want to just talk, if we can, in turn about those changes. In terms of your understanding now of how she coped with changes to her routine, what's your view on that and how she managed?
I think that was one of the things, changes or stressful events. I didn't know to the extent I know now, having read all the reports, the expert reports, and having had access to them. I know a lot more. But, yeah, change and things like that was difficult for her. I mean, if I had to change the day of my visit, we'd discuss it, there'd be a reason, and she'd accept it. But changes in her life, in her relationship, and in her routine had often, I think, been seen as the precursor to incidents.
And you record in your statement examples of Dr. B and Miss C describing the difficulties she had. You say that Miss Michelle has also identified that she's quick to relapse when she's stressed, in addition to change in her sleep and routine resulting in her relapse, and her being very regimented in her routine.
Yeah.
And so in terms of the changes that were happening in the weeks leading up to the 4th of March, I want to ask firstly about the effect of the lockdown on Aurora Ward. At the start of 2022, you explained that Marion had told you that there was an increase in COVID-19 infections. Is that right?
Yeah, I think she'd obviously been at Brockfield House for the whole of the pandemic.
Yes.
So, but obviously on Fuji Ward, there were activities in the ward. She didn't always have leave at that time, so life just kind of went on as normal.
Yes.
Nothing substantially changed. It was the same food, the same routine, more or less. They couldn't go to the gym and places like that, but in Aurora Ward, they did have a lockdown just after Christmas. Again, EPUT's dates are all over the place. They didn't record the dates of COVID lockdowns, clearly.
I think you say in your statement that there's some confusion as to when it ended, but that the start date was
including
the 14th
the one,
of February.
Yeah, but there was also the one prior to that, where they said it lasted, I think, till the 26th of January. But I actually went out with Marion on the 23rd of January. That was the last time I saw her. So they didn't record the dates of these lockdowns. So the difference between that lockdown and the one that, she died during,
Yes.
was that I think they'd known there was going to be one, maybe, someone had got ill and there was a general sense. So her and her friend had been into Wickford, done a massive shop and got a taxi back. So they were sort of, life carried on as normal.
And was this
they
the
were
8th of February?
self-catering.
Is that the 8th of February, is that right?
No, this was in, there was one just after Christmas, December 2021 until January 2022. So this was another lockdown she'd experienced on Aurora Ward. And the point I'm making is not much changed during that for her, because she'd been able to get a lot of shopping in.
I see.
They'd anticipated a lockdown. So life just kind of carried on.
Can I just ask
then it
you,
finished.
Can I just ask you to turn up page 34, paragraph 166? It talks there about lockdowns between 24th of December 2020 and the 25th of January 2021.
Yeah, the date is wrong.
I wondered. So that should in fact be 2021 to 25th of January 2022.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
So there's a period of lockdown.
She wasn't on Aurora Ward in
No,
that day.
indeed.
Sorry.
No, that's no problem at all. It's helpful to clarify. So there's a period when she has anticipated the lockdown, so got in food with her flatmate, patient C, and therefore their meals continue as before, their routine of food preparation.
Yeah, everything continues,
But in relation to the lockdown that happened...
I don't think it was as long, although it looks like it's very long. I actually think it didn't start till after Christmas, but that's just my recollection.
And so there may be an issue with those dates, but certainly there was one around the start of the year.
Yeah.
And then the second one, which is the one we are in at the 4th
Yeah.
of March, May started around the 14th of February. There wasn't that ability to prepare in advance, is that right?
No. So she had last gone shopping on the 8th of February. And she hadn't been, because she didn't have a spleen,
Yes.
she was more at risk of infections. So I think that was a particularly bad time for COVID infections. So I think she'd been quite careful and she wasn't going out as much. And so she'd been out to do some shopping on the 8th. And then obviously hadn't been again, and it started on the 14th. And obviously she wasn't aware it was going to start this time.
And so, just in terms of our understanding of how much this would have affected Marian's routine, how much of her day was based on food preparation, what she ate, that sort of thing?
Well, I think it was quite important to her, food.
Yes.
She was a comfort eater. And she liked to have, you know, a chocolate bar every day, normally, which she could, there's a shop there she could have gone to, but obviously they couldn't go during COVID. She liked to make home-cooked meals, not all the time, but she did like cooking. And she didn't like what she called trolley food, which was the food that they had on Fuji ward for patients, you know, the food provided by Brockfield House. So, yeah.
And so by this point, she's on Aurora ward. She can't make the food for herself. She's reliant, presumably, on ward staff. What was the arrangement during the lockdown as to how meals would be prepared? What would happen?
Well, what she said to me was initially the staff did like a small shop, maybe like 10 to 15 items for everyone. After the lockdown started and people were running out of food. But obviously that didn't last very long. So then they were going to get like a supermarket online order. That was suggested, but that then didn't happen. Then they were going to have the trolley food, the food provided by Brockfield House, which nobody wanted. So in the end, they decided that the staff would cook the meals. So that was a change for Marion because she said she went down to having 2 meals a day because the staff were cooking meals around their breaks. Sometimes they'd be having their evening meal at 4 o'clock.
Yes.
So she then didn't want to have sort of breakfast and lunch. So she just had like brunch at 11 and then all sort of breakfasty food at 11 and then at 4 she would eat her main meal. So that was a change for her, and it wasn't, you know, obviously she could have been in prison eating prison food, but it wasn't the kind of food that she would have cooked for herself and would have enjoyed that was being cooked. So.
And so for a patient with particularly fixed needs in terms of routine,
Yeah.
the meals that she's eating are changing, the timings of the meals are changing, and she's unable to go out as she normally would.
Yeah.
You point in your statement to the patient safety incident investigation report noting that there was no evidence that recognition of the challenge to those who used food as an element of self-soothing during this time was taken into account.
Yeah.
And you would agree with
Yeah,
that?
yeah. I mean, I think staff did go to the shop, but I got the impression that was more for people that vaped.
Yes.
To get vapes. I'm not sure that Marion ever was able to get a chocolate bar or anything else she wanted.
Turning to another aspect of change at this time, I want to ask you about the timing and impact of patient C moving out of the shared flat. What was your impression of the value of and the closeness of that relationship that patient C and Marion had?
Yeah, it was very important to Marion because Marion hadn't really had friends throughout her life. And one of the things that you read in the psychological report was that, you know, loneliness had been an issue for her. So, you know, she was suddenly in the company of all these women who had a mental health diagnosis, some of which was the same as hers.
Yes.
So they had, you know, some of them had a lot in common. They didn't all get on, but she did get on with several patients, 2 of whom had been discharged and she kept in contact with. And Patient C, as I say, she probably knew for probably 2 years through another ward and through going to groups. And then they ended up on Aurora ward at the same time, sharing a flat. So they were close, they cooked together, they went swimming in Wickford together, went to the gym together. So they did quite a lot together, and they kind of knew quite a lot about each other's families, and, you know, they would talk to each other, is my understanding.
And so at this point in time, she's been living with Patient C for more than 5 months.
Yeah.
What's your impression now of whether the significance of this relationship was appreciated by staff?
Well, I don't think it was. Her key worker said in evidence at the inquest that she didn't think they were friends. The deputy sister that had worked on the ward a long time and was on duty the day Marion died said that she knew that they were friends. But I guess, again, I don't understand why her key worker wouldn't have known they were friends. But it was very important to Marion because, as I say, this was a kind of new experience for her.
Yes.
That she could just quite easily make friends and get on with people. And these were other women that were in the same boat as her, and they were in this sort of specialist provision for years. This wasn't just a sort of assessment mental health ward with people coming in and out. They were living together for years.
And then on the 2nd of March, you had a call with Marion where she told you that Patient C had gone. Is that right?
Yeah, I couldn't remember in my original statement to the inquest the exact day Marion had told me, but I know she had told me, and she sounded very gutted about it, I have to say. But the investigation report said that Patient C had moved 2 weeks before.
Oh.
Now, I kind of knew that didn't ring true with me, but that's what staff told the investigators, apparently, and that's what was there. It wasn't until the actual inquest and in evidence that EPUT were made to find out the actual date, which I think was quite hard for them because they don't really seem to record these things.
Yes.
And it was the 2nd of March, 2 days before Marion died. Marion did know that the plan for this patient was that she was going to be discharged before Marion.
Yes.
So she knew that, but it's their policy, obviously, confidentiality, to not tell anyone.
Yes.
It's like in the morning you wake up, you're moving today, and the first thing that your flatmate finds out is that that's when you're moving. And I think at another time it might not have affected Marion so much, but I think it was in the context of all these other changes and the fact that they were in this seemingly never-ending lockdown that was always about to end, but then never did.
And do you think that's something that should have been noted somewhere in terms of increasing Marion's risk or her vulnerability at that time?
I think so, because reading about her fear of abandonment was one of the issues that was kind of involved in her stabbing her partner in 2018.
Yes.
Because their relationship status had changed, and Marion had reacted to that. So that was known to be fear of abandonment, and it's one of the symptoms of emotionally unstable personality disorder, as I understand it.
Yes, and you quote from Dr. B's addendum report where he said, series of self-harming behaviours to relieve inattention, extreme fear of rejection and abandonment. So it was part of the concern. Moving then to another aspect of the changes that were occurring, you describe Marion being told on the 1st of March that she would have a Jersey court hearing on the 4th of March to review her care as part of the 6 monthly reviews.
Yeah.
Then on the 3rd of March, the day before Marion died, she was informed that that hearing had been moved back to the end of the month. Is that right?
Yes. I think she spoke to her solicitor about it and the staff were sort of on to that change. They did recognise that as a change, that may cause Marion stress, and they did check up with her about that change. And although Marion seemed okay about it, I think it did because she was coming kind of close to discharge, and which was due to be around August, September.
Yes.
Obviously decisions were going to be made. So I guess that there was maybe more high stakes. The dates had been changed in the past, and she'd sort of been okay about it, I think. But I think what's being okay on the surface and what Marion understood, because she didn't have the problem-solving skills.
Yes.
And again, that wasn't something I knew about until I've read the reports, and it isn't in any of the, reports that have been done at Brockfield as a risk factor. So how we interpret being told something and how she actually experienced it are probably two different things.
And so problems with problem solving were identified by Dr. B and Ms. C.
Yeah.
But from your reading of the material, that's not something that made its way into the ongoing record of her risk profile.
Because it really helped me in hearing that information, because I thought, well, something that sort of seems run-of-the-mill to me, she doesn't see it in the same way, because she can't grapple with the problem. She panics, or, it's stressful for her in a way that other people would just think, oh, yeah, that's... But she doesn't... she just doesn't experience that in the same way. So I think that could have been quite a helpful... Well, it would have been a helpful thing for staff to be aware of, and I don't get any sense from what I've read that they were aware of that.
And then another aspect of potentially destabilising elements, you point to arrangements being made around that time to have Marion assessed in preparation for her discharge and to secure her a suitable place to live. And you mentioned earlier that her key worker had spoken to Marion about supported accommodation. And on the 11th of February, is it right that Marion gave permission for that information to be shared with you?
Yeah, it was the social worker that did that, not the key worker. Yeah, the social worker arranges those sort of, assessments.
And by the 3rd of March, the day before Marion died, had any contact been made with you?
No, it hadn't.
And so at this point, Marion is facing a potentially stressful assessment with an accommodation provider that was booked in for the 8th of March.
Yeah, which I was going to see her on the 7th, so I probably would have talked to her about it then. But yeah, I knew it was booked on the 8th because it had been booked in at Ward Round, which I think was on the 1st, possibly.
And as far as you were aware, building up to and in advance of the 4th of March, was there anything to suggest that Marion's mental state or behaviour had changed during those weeks?
I think she just, when I last spoke to her on the Thursday night, I think there was a bit of I was a bit worried because she seemed to have given up reading. She just seemed a bit fed up. And she just said, I've just been lying on my bed, not listening to the radio, just lying there. And I just thought, that doesn't sound very healthy. But I just thought, well, I'm seeing her on Monday. The lockdown is going to end tomorrow. She'll be out to Wickford doing her shopping, and everything will just return to normal. I just thought, and I didn't know everything I know now.
Yes.
About the risk factors.
And so at this point, from your understanding, there are some staff members that are expecting, if she is relapsing, for there to be psychosis. There are some who are expecting her to remain calm. There's general confusion. But from your perspective, there wasn't anything in particular at that point that would have pointed to a relapse?
No, but I knew that it was a lot of change for her.
Yes.
But I was kind of assuming that staff recognised those changes. I just assumed that they would think, this is a change, that's a change, that's a change. But obviously I found out subsequently they weren't counting a lot of the things I was counting as changes as changes.
You refer in your statement to a piece of homework that Marion completed for Dr. D in her self-forgiveness handbook on the 3rd of March, which was uncharacteristically brief, and that he therefore arranged an appointment to discuss her answers on the 8th of March. Is that right?
Yes.
But beyond that, that was the only thing, as far as you can see,
Yeah.
that sort of demonstrated a change in her behaviour.
Yeah, other than, as I say, not just seeming to be, you know, disinterested in other things, I guess. That was
Yes.
the only thing.
And then on the 3rd of March, there is also a risk profile form completed for Marion. What is your view as to the sufficiency and accuracy of that form, knowing what you know now?
Well, it just wasn't accurate because it was saying, you know, impulsive history of impulsive behaviour, and they'd written no. I can't remember. There was something else that was blatantly
I think you
wrong.
say early warning signs of relapse is listed,
Yeah.
and it's marked yes.
Yes, and it's obviously a no for Marion.
And then, as you say, impulse control and impulsivity as a historical risk factor is also marked no when it should have been marked yes.
Yeah.
And so, would it be fair to say that in your mind that had it been a effective and accurate risk profile, may have been an opportunity at which they
It may
could
have
take
been.
stock?
It would have given a better chance, I think, and for staff to actually know, you know, Marion's history well.
And then turning to the conclusions at the inquest, it's right, you refer to the jury concluding that given what was known by clinicians and staff on Aurora Ward with regard to Marion's capacity historically to suffer sudden and extreme deterioration in her mental state, leading her to inflict extreme violence against herself or others, insufficient consideration was given to the known potential triggers for such deterioration, such as fear of abandonment and sudden changes to plans or routines.
Yeah.
And this is another thing that is said to be possibly contributory.
Yeah, I think the mistake that was made over the date, she was meeting the supported housing, having that assessment was really probably the last straw for her, because
And-
she'd been expecting it to be the following week.
Yes.
And then the day that they were then being told that lockdown was probably going to end, was she was suddenly having this assessment at 2:00.
So this is turning to the 4th of March itself.
Sorry.
And no, that's extremely helpful.
Yeah.
At that point, she, in her mind, is expecting to have the assessment meeting a few days away on the
Yeah.
8th. At the morning meeting, do I understand it correctly, she's then told that, in fact,
It's that day at
that
2:00.
meeting is happening that day at 2:00.
Even though the lockdown hadn't ended, and they weren't going to be told if the lockdown had ended till 2:30. So how this was actually going to happen, again, it was just common sense had gone out the window.
So there are 2 members of staff at this point looking after the patients on Aurora Ward. Do you know how many patients there would have been
I
at this
think there
stage?
was 9, but obviously the difference was they were all there.
Yes.
And the other difference was the staff were cooking meals, 3 meals, 2 meals a day, which wasn't normally what they did. And normally everyone was out. Well, some people were out for long periods. So suddenly it was 2 members of staff sort of doing everything, and everyone was there, and they were having to cook meals and take their breaks, etc.
And the morning meeting happens. Are both staff present?
No, just one staff member, the agency. I think it was an agency member that had worked quite a lot at Brockfield House. The deputy sister had gone off to a meeting.
And so there's one member of staff conducting the meeting. And is it right that the information that she gave about Marion's meeting with the accommodation was wrong, that she'd just got the date wrong? Is that right?
The deputy sister said at the inquest, the investigation couldn't find why this had been recorded wrongly, but the deputy sister said at the inquest that it was her that had recorded it wrongly in the diary, and she didn't know why she'd done that. But if they would have known what Marion was like, she was a stickler. She had a diary. she would know dates and times more than the staff would. She would be, saying, I've got this today at this time. She wasn't someone that made mistakes. So if she was going to the office to say, are you sure about this? Which she did apparently twice that morning.
Yes.
They should have taken, to me, if they, knowing her, they should have taken notice of that and double-checked it by calling the social worker, but no one did. And no one saw her go into the office twice as a sign of anxiety. That they knew that she wasn't expecting it that day, but they didn't respond to that. They just said, it's at 2:00, even though they were still in lockdown.
And at the meeting, is it right that they'd also said that they were expecting an update on lockdown, or
at
that
2:30.
It would end at 2:30?
So the coroner actually said to them, did you think to contact the staff that were coming to assess Marion? And they were like, no. They just weren't. They just weren't thinking. I don't think they just weren't thinking.
And you've described a lot more expectations and responsibilities, perhaps, for these staff at this point in time, whilst all those patients are there rather than out. What is your view as to whether this was as a result of additional pressures or a general approach?
I don't really know, but I think there were additional pressures on staff because they kept the same staffing numbers, but there was a lot more for staff to do, and that didn't seem to be taken into account.
What is your view as to the impact that this erroneous information and the failure to then check whether she had the date right had on Marion?
Well, I think it was the final straw, and I think she just panicked. I think she must, she might not have shown it, but I think, it was a shock to her. But also the other issue was everyone was potentially going out into Wickford to do their shopping, and it was the end of lockdown. But she was, bittersweet. She was having a meeting about discharge, but that meant she wasn't going to be able to go out.
Yes.
So it was, it must have been, I think it must have just been a shock to her, and it was just a panic, probably.
And then at 11:15, Marion requested a large kitchen knife. She told staff to prepare her lunch. She was issued with a knife with an 18-centimetre blade. Is it right that that's the largest, as you understand it?
Yeah, and it was a dagger kind. It wasn't the rounded tip, which is what they had available at that time.
They just had the dagger kind available.
Yeah,
there wasn't the safety knives. And you explained that the nurse, Miss F, gave evidence at the inquest that at the time of issuing the knife to Marion, she was displaying a normal presentation. She didn't detect any irritability or anger, but that in fact she had understood that Marion probably would be calm before relapse. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true.
You comment in your statement that you were concerned that there was no curiosity about why Marion needed a knife. Can you say a bit more about that?
Well, because she wouldn't have had any food to cook, because staff were cooking all the meals, and she'd been. I think there was one night she didn't have the staff meal, but she was having the staff meal that they'd cooked.
What happened on the night she didn't have the staff meal?
I don't know. I think she had something maybe out of a tin. But the other thing, this is a slight side shift, but when I read the Brockfield House CQC report of 2015, which it was rated as good, one of the points they fell down on was that they weren't putting the right date on food that was opened. So they were sticklers for that. Anything that was out of date had to go out, and food had to be brought that was packaged. So if you bought vegetables or fruit, it had to be covered. It couldn't just be loose. So they were sticklers for that, and yet the investigation report, the police did not check after she died what food was left. And the investigators just said there were some fresh vegetables left, but I was thinking they would not have been fresh, and certainly not by health and safety standards.
Sorry, who said there would be some fresh food available?
The investigators said that 2 weeks after they cleared out, after she died, they cleared out the fridge, and there were some vegetables in there that would have been fresh at the time. But I really do query that, given that her last shot was on the 8th of February, and then staff probably, around a few days into lockdown, bought about 10 or 12 items.
And so this is 4th of March.
Yeah,
So
this is some time after.
yes, 2
And
weeks.
staff are cooking meals. It's been decided because people don't have food that staff are cooking meals. So it's just doesn't add up. There's no curiosity about it because because people can ask for a knife and be given it. They can do they can do it even at the end of a 16-day lockdown when there is, it just is very odd and very disappointing.
And then on the knife signing out sheet, you've referred already that of those entries that are recorded, Marion always returned the knife between 15 to 30 minutes later. We know on this occasion that a member of staff went to check on Marion sometime between 12 or 12:15, is that right?
Yeah, it's very unclear really when it was. It was what they say is they don't check on people to get the knives back. They just do their hourly obs, which is what she was on, hourly observation. So that's what they were doing.
And so in terms of why the staff member went, you've mentioned the hourly observations.
Yeah.
You also comment in your statement that that staff member was planning to ask whether Marion wanted an omelette.
Yeah, because she was making an omelette, they decided, with some other patients. And so she was going to ask Marion, forgetting that Marion had a knife because she was supposed to be cooking her lunch. And again, this is something the investigators just let stand as a statement and didn't ask another question about.
And so to your mind, was there a lack of vigilance around the approach taken to giving knives and perhaps a
complete
casual
lack
approach?
of vigilance, a
What was your
very
impression?
casual approach.
Marion was tragically found in her bathroom at some point between 12 and 12:15.
Yeah.
And the records, as you say, as to the exact timing are unclear, with several stab wounds which she had inflicted using the knife that had been issued to her.
Yeah.
You comment that there was a delay in the emergency medical response to Marion due to confusion about the type of emergency. Can you say a bit more about what happened? as you understand
That was
it?
one thing that the investigation revealed.
Yes.
I didn't know about it until they revealed that apparently the nurse I think it was the deputy sister that had found Marion, had do the pinpoint alarm, which is their system. So it's either a psychiatric emergency, which then calls the staff from other wards who are kind of on duty to deal with someone who's, getting aggressive or whatever.
Yes.
And then a medical emergency, which calls the duty doctor. So the nurse is saying she did a medical emergency over the radio or whatever, the pinpoint alarm, but for some reason at security or the reception, it was put through as a psychiatric emergency. So that caused a delay because there was confusion over what kind of emergency it was.
And that report and investigation recognised that in Marion's case, it would be unlikely that her attending sooner would have had an impact on the outcome for Marion, but it may have done in other cases.
Yeah.
You explain in your statement that you have further concerns about the emergency response that followed. Can you say a little bit about what other concerns you had?
I think I don't understand, if you see someone in that situation, why someone cannot just phone an ambulance.
Yes.
Why are you shilly-shallying with pinpoint alarms. No one at Brockfield House has got the equipment or skills to save someone in that condition. That is a clear paramedic situation. But they went about their routine, and then I think it's stated in the paramedic record that it was like 12:17, I can't remember the time. Or 12:20 even.
12:17 to 12:20.
Yeah, that the ambulance was actually called. And I think, I recall that was the OT that called the ambulance. So there didn't seem to be any sort of a system of, you know, someone actually calling an ambulance when an ambulance was needed. It was kind of, you followed this procedure, whatever you saw before you. And one of the, you know, I appreciate what the staff saw that day. No one should have to see. But, you know, the deputy sister pulled the pinpoint alarm and the other person went to get towels.
So it was your impression that...
It was just inadequate.
Yes.
And also, which again wasn't picked up by the coroner actually, but I think is in my statement, and it was in the records, that one staff member had mentioned, and the paramedic had put it in there, or the police had put it in their statement for the inquest, that it took 5 minutes to open the toilet door.
Yes, you have that in your statement.
But again, you see, the investigation didn't mention these things. You know, again, it was just taken. They raised the medical emergency, but in the investigation report, it doesn't even say what time the ambulance was called. Isn't that a key element of an investigation report into a death?
You also comment on Marion having been moved from the toilet area into the corridor, and also there being confusion as to whether the defibrillator was shocking or not.
Yeah, and again, that was the investigators that raised that. Because I think my understanding is if there's no signs of life, it won't shock. That's, I think, from what I've read. But there was confusion amongst staff as to whether it had shocked or not. And the next day they met when the person was completing whatever form needed to be completed, and they changed it to that it hadn't shocked, meaning that she was deceased when they were trying to use it. So again, there was a lack of training in these sort of emergencies, and I guess a lack of belief there could be a medical emergency, maybe.
Yes. I want to turn now to your concerns regarding your contact with EPUT and the investigations that took place following Marion's death. And you've talked through some of this already. But first of all, I understand from your statement that at 1 p.m. on the 4th of March, so this is obviously very shortly after staff have entered Marion's room, you received a call from Marion's social worker. Can you say a bit about what she told you when you spoke to her?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I was pleased that she'd phoned because I was going to talk to her about the accommodation.
Yes.
Ironically. And then she said, oh, Marion's hurt herself. I'm not sure what's happening, but, you know, I'll get back to you as soon as I know more. And I just said to her, it's this... you know, swear word lockdown, by which I meant all the change. And I said, there's been so many changes for Marion.
Yes.
And I explained that patient C had been moved. She was unaware of that. And so then, you know, she told me, I phoned my parents and let them know. And I was just kind of packing my bag, hoping that she was in hospital.
And what was the impression you were left with as to whether Marion was going to be in hospital and recovering, or whether something more serious had happened?
I didn't really know, but obviously when Marion does something, it's always quite serious. I did know that.
You say that at about 2:30 you hadn't heard any more information, so you called the social worker again. What happened then?
It just went to voicemail. So by this time I was getting quite emotional and worried.
Yes, of course. And you say that the next contact you had was from Norfolk police, who came to your home at about 3 p.m. Did they explain what had happened? What happened?
No, I mean, I knew when the police car pulled up, I saw it, and I just thought, she's died.
You contacted Essex Police.
They didn't know. She was the messenger that'd been asked by Essex Police
Yes.
to give me the news. So that was, and she was lovely. But she obviously didn't know anything about the circumstances. She couldn't give me any information. So she gave me the number for Essex Police. And she said, someone should phone, if you don't hear by a certain time, give them a ring. And I hadn't heard, so at 6 o'clock I phoned. But I had to just leave a message. And I didn't actually hear from Essex Police until 9 p.m. the following day.
So 36 hours afterwards, you hear from Essex Police.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, on the 4th of March, at 9 p.m,
Yeah.
Marion's social worker called you.
Yeah.
Was she able to tell you any more?
Well, I don't know. I think she called me. I'm a social worker. She's a social worker. It wasn't part of any protocol. I think she just called me because she probably felt bad,
Yes.
And she just said, condolences. And then I said, can you tell me, where Marion is? And she said, I think she's at Broomfield Hospital. And then she told me the name of the undertaker. And she told me that the chaplain from Brockfield House had gone in the ambulance with Marion.
Yes.
So that's what she told me. But she didn't tell me what had happened. And it was actually, I phoned the undertaker the following day, duty undertaker on a Saturday afternoon, and he actually got back to me and kind of told me what more the situation was, because
Yes.
no one had actually told me. Confirmed she was at Broomfield Hospital and that, the coroner would be involved and she was going to have an autopsy and things like that, So he was actually, this random person was actually the person that sort of gave me the most time and information. But it was me having to find the information, even though I'd lost my sister. It wasn't provided to me, and I still don't know if it should be the police, should it be put, it's not clear to me. And does the same happen if somebody gets in a road traffic accident? Do they have the same treatment, or is it just when people die in mental health institutions? I don't know, because maybe they're worth a bit less than other people.
That's the impression that you...
Well, either that or it's a sense of, we might have done something wrong. So, we're not going to talk about it. But all people actually want is the facts of what's happened and where their loved one is. They might get shouted at a bit, but, surely they're able to deal with that. Somebody's lost someone. It's just very badly managed, very badly managed.
You go on to refer in your statement to a memorial service that was held at Brockfield House for Marion. How did that come about?
That was, I got a phone call, I think, from the social worker who said that the chaplain was going to be in contact with me because they were organising this. And I agreed with it, and I think that was a good thing that, that they did, because obviously Marion knew so many people at Brockfield, so many patients.
Yes.
And suddenly she was gone, and, I think a lot of people that were, more unwell on a day-to-day basis had really looked up to Marion, and then suddenly she'd done that. So, that was managed well, and the chaplain liaised with me, and I attended, and I sort of I read about Marion, and they planted a rose. So that when I got to meet some of the women that she'd known.
Yes.
So that was nice. So that was dealt with well, and then they arranged another day, I think it was the same week, where I went to collect Marion's possessions, and that was also dealt with well. Everything was packed already. I got to see her room. I met some of the staff, the chief executive and someone else from specialist services was there in the background. Obviously, cynically, I'm thinking, testing the waters of what my reaction was going to be. And they'd left her toiletries, and I said they could go to other patients' mobile phone and things. So that was dealt with well.
Yes. And then much later in early November 2022, you received a call from Marian's original social worker to say that an envelope full of condolence cards had been found in a drawer in an office. Yeah. Those were condolence cards from patients. To the to our family, So they arrived I asked him to send them to me. He asked if I wanted them, and I said yes. So I received them in November 2022. And then in terms of the investigation that followed, you explained that on the 21st of March, you were notified by letter from EPUT's Patient Safety Incident Management Team that they would be reviewing Marian's care.
Yeah.
And you were given contact details for a family liaison officer. What was your impression of the suitability of Miss H, who was the family liaison officer?
Well, she did tell me this, that she was the manager of the line manager of Marian's social worker at Brockfield House, which I thought was slightly odd.
Because of the conflict of interest?
I think so, but I think what the only way I can describe it, the thinking was, because I'd said no one was to blame, because I was very conflicted when Marian died, because obviously knowing her history,
yes,
there aren't many warning signs when Marian does something.
Yes.
So I understood that, and I didn't, kind of want staff to feel bad. And I was very conflicted about that for quite a long time. And obviously I didn't have all the information I had now. So I think it was probably taken like, oh, well, there's not going to be a problem with this. She's a social worker. Let's give her another social worker, job done sort of thing.
And you received a booklet, Information for Families Following a Bereavement, with the letter, which talked about what you can expect if there's an investigation.
Yeah.
But you'd been told there was a review, is that right? So you didn't appreciate that the expectations for an investigation were ones that you could ask for?
No.
You asked the family liaison officer, once you had the help of a senior caseworker from Inquest, for details of the investigators, is that right?
Yes.
And so you were liaising from then on directly with the
because I
investigators?
just found the family liaison officer. She just wanted to have heart-to-hearts with me. Right. She didn't actually tell me really anything about what was happening. And when I asked her to find out information, she never really got back to me. So I gave up really on her. And she didn't she wouldn't email me, she would just phone me. So I just gave up really on her.
You also outlined the delays that you experienced in receiving the report. Can you say a little bit about that process?
Yeah, I think the original investigator, probably it was a little bit, she was trying to be helpful, and she said it would be July and that, it would be all through all the various committees it needed to go through by August 2022. And then we had the pre-inquest review hearing, and it wasn't happening then. It was going to happen mid-October was the date given. Well, it's not a date, is it? It's a general time. But then it still didn't arrive. No explanation was forthcoming. I think by that time I then was getting a solicitor, which I hadn't had. There was just no information. And then I got a phone call on the 21st of December, 4 days before Christmas, saying, oh, the report's done now. It'll be being posted out to you from the family liaison officer. And I was thinking, why are you doing this 4 days before Christmas? this is not something I need now. I want the report, but I don't want it posted to me now.
And did it arrive before Christmas?
It didn't arrive, and I wasn't even at home. I was in Jersey with my parents. It didn't arrive till I think the 12th of January when I'd had to actually go back to Jersey. So they didn't forewarn me. They said there'd been a delay, but they didn't actually say, like, we're posting it today. And then I had to go through this rigmarole of getting a password to get it via email, because obviously I wasn't at home to actually have access to it. So there just wasn't the planning, behind it. And I wasn't kept up to date on it by anyone.
And you also comment on errors in the report, and you talk specifically about the accompanying cover letter to the report, referring to you as the client who had died.
Yes, it said, we've completed the investigation into Karen's care, and they just sent that out. Which, by then, it was just another thing, to be honest. It was just another thing.
And I think you mentioned hearing one further time from the family liaison officer.
Yeah.
When was that?
That was about a week or maybe 2 before the inquest. Obviously, my thought is somebody had nudged her and said, have you been in contact with Marian's sister about the inquest? She hadn't, and she hadn't kept in contact with me at all. And she said, would you like me to support you at the inquest? That was bizarre. Of course I didn't want her to support me. So, again, the impression was not good. And they hadn't thought through that I may change my mind or my view of things. And actually, I did need someone independent, because what if I had an issue with the social worker?
Yes.
Their line manager was the family. There was just no thought put into it, other than she's a social worker, you're a social worker. And that was, I think, the level of thought.
You then outline the findings of the report you outline them in some detail in your statement, which we've largely already covered.
Yeah.
But beyond these specific findings, what was your view as to the adequacy of the patient safety incident investigation report, and whether there were the gaps in it?
Yeah, there were gaps. I mean, I was grateful the points about the medical psychiatrist. There was bits that I found out from that I wouldn't have found out. But then there was whole areas where, like with the omelette and the lunch and the issuing of the knife, that they just took at face value, and they didn't ask any more questions. The questions I asked were answered to some extent, but not really delved into. It felt like there was always another question to be asked, but they only asked one question, and then they just accepted the answer and wrote it down. They didn't pick up the different diagnosis. They didn't pick up quite a few issues. They didn't even mention Marian's diagnoses. And the first thing they did when they gave evidence was mention them. Because
this is at the inquest.
Yeah, because probably counsel had told them to, because it's a major gap in the report.
Yes.
So it was a long report, and there were some highlighted deficits in it, but it was more the sort of procedural stuff that had gone wrong, and the issuing of knives, and that there was no risk assessment, and that, her risk assessment wasn't up to date. Things like the discharge planning, they didn't really delve into. They didn't express an opinion that actually would have been helpful to have had in her particular case with her history. They didn't go to areas like that.
And then you talk also about the delay in provision of material by EPUT to you.
Yeah.
And that you felt it was being drip-fed as the inquest proceedings approached.
The investigators say they've read everything, so you kind of think, well, it must be there then.
Yes.
But, you know, it comes in drips and drabs. And, you know, my statement was due in the April. Well, by that time, I didn't have a lot of information. I only had the sort of expert reports from when the court hearing that Marion was involved in. I only really had that. I didn't have her record, you know, a lot of other information. I did have the investigation report. But yeah, it's yeah. I mean, it's traumatic being told there's going to be a jury inquest because you've never heard of it.
Yes.
And then, you know, I wanted to be involved, and so you have to get your head around a lot of information. But it's very hard to respond to it when you haven't got all the information.
One of the examples you give is the EPUT action plan, which was produced by EPUT to explain to the coroner that things had changed since Marion's death. And that was only shared during the inquest hearing, and you felt that didn't give you much time to consider it.
No.
The inquest touching upon Marion's death was an Article 2 jury inquest in which the jury returned a narrative conclusion, concluding that Marion Michelle took her own life, but were unable to determine her intention at the time she did so. And you set out at your paragraph 265 their conclusions as to the omissions which possibly contributed significantly to Marion's death, all of which we've outlined, but those were the absence of a focused risk assessment with respect to Marion having unsupervised access to knives prior to her transfer to Aurora Ward and following, inadequate processes and poor controls around access to knives increased this possibility, insufficient consideration being given to the known triggers for deterioration, and a missed opportunity for staff to consider the cumulative effect of changes on Marion's health. Is there anything further you wish to say about those conclusions?
No, the only thing that they didn't conclude was possibly significantly contribution was the Fuji Ward bit.
Yes.
Because obviously she was observed at
What's
all
the
times.
What?
The access to sharps on knives on Fuji Ward, because she was always supervised.
Yes.
So that they didn't. So I think it was 5 out of 6 that was put to them. They agreed. But the only one they didn't agree was the Fuji Ward, because she was always supervised on Fuji Ward.
So is it right that they said that there was an absence of any further specific risk assessment of Marion in respect of her supervised access to knives on Fuji Ward, but that although they agreed with that, they heard no evidence that this contributed to Marion's death because there was that consistent supervision. So it didn't, although it was that there wasn't that risk assessment, it wasn't causative.
No.
I want to turn now finally to the final part of your statement, which records your reflections and recommendations, and in particular at paragraph 276, you set out a list of recommendations based on your personal experience. I'm going to ask Sarah if you can put on the screen page 61, paragraph 276. Now, you set out a total of 12 recommendations. You can see on the screen there in full the first 3. We've been through some of these earlier in your evidence, and I just want to ask whether in relation to those 3, there's anything more you would like to say about any of those recommendations.
I guess it's the overall thing is that I wasn't aware of any of these things.
Yes.
You know, it was assumption that she was there. Obviously, I've said a lot of positive things about the environment and some of what was on offer for her there. But so the assumption was, you know, because you weren't giving any information, that all these things were in place, but actually they weren't. But you weren't aware of it, and, you know, things weren't shared with you, really. There wasn't involvement in with the family. And I think the discharge planning as well, you know, was woefully inadequate for Marion.
You say at the bottom of page 61 and onto page 62, you recommend that discharge planning involve a clearer framework of timescales, process and planning, and that families should be consulted more and more involved from an earlier stage in plans. Is there, I think you've commented upon that. Is there anything further you want to say about that?
Well, they're the support for the person going forward, aren't they? And it's going to, be a big thing in their lives as well. And with Marian's history, any sort of change or move and she hadn't lived independently on her own. She'd lived with a partner for a long time. So there was a lot involved, and they were aware that she hadn't really thought that through, but they didn't share that. They didn't explore that, or there's no evidence that they did. And it just feels like you're getting towards discharge, you've got a rough date, and you're in the sort of sausage machine, really. One size fits all.
If we can go now onto page 62, there are a further 4 recommendations set out in full here.
Yeah.
If you can just have a read of those, and if there's anything further you wish to say about any of these.
Yeah, I think a lot of things weren't recorded on, the records every day. I appreciate they shouldn't be writing things about people that for the sake of it, but the records every day were really just read the same.
Yes.
As did a lot of the ward rounds reports and things, cut and paste sort of style. And I think just the appreciation that for people, like how many days had this lockdown been going on, just to record that, because it wasn't very clear like when it started and when it ended. For staff coming on duty to know, this is day 10. I remember when, in the height of the pandemic, we were stuck inside, how that actually feels. I think that would just be a flag up. I think Marian, was someone who had lived a life. She'd had a lot of settled periods when nothing had happened. And when she relapsed, it was serious. And in fact, the professor that did the report about her said the greatest risk to Marian on discharge was her accidentally killing herself through self-harm. So it had been recorded, but nobody seemed to be. She was just this model patient. And that then I think she was just someone they didn't really need to worry about. And she'd done so well. She was a success story, sort of forgetting that she still could have risk factors, and that, times of change were big times for her. And the friendships, I think, I think that was completely underestimated by staff, the importance of those to people on these kind of wards where you're there for years.
Can I ask, at the time, you've talked about her as the model patient who was sort of overlooked, and you've identified a lot of the triggers, and the things that clearly were affecting her, and the risks. But at the time, what was your sense of the dangers Marian was in?
I think it was any change and transition, really. I suppose, I felt needed a bit more care and attention. And I thought that was being done when Dr. B said, you're having a 2-week transition to Aurora. I thought they were bearing that in mind. So I think she needed more support.
But at the time, did you foresee what might happen?
No. But I didn't know all that I know now either.
Yeah.
They had all that information about her.
Yeah.
And you mean in terms of things like problem-solving difficulties and that sort of thing?
Yeah. I acknowledge that obviously all of Marian's incidents were, the family didn't see them coming. And so to a certain extent, who could see them coming? I do acknowledge that. But I think at this stage, they did have the best chance to see it coming. But it just seemed to be, a number of factors that just came together that sort of tipped it over really into that, which was very sad because she was due to be discharged. So,
I just want to make sure that if we look at the bottom of page 62, you've had an opportunity to comment on that. That's a recommendation relating to staff training in emergency response, including the use of defibrillators.
Yeah.
And then, if Sarah, we can go to page 63, there are a further 3 recommendations which are set out in full.
Yeah.
There.
It's just really, I think investigations should be independent.
Yes.
Because I felt that it wasn't really thorough enough.
Yes.
And I'll never know if they would have actually contacted me. I contacted them, and therefore I gave my view, but they didn't contact me, the investigators.
When you made direct contact,
with
rather than through the family liaison officer.
And the inquest charities national oversight mechanism, I believe in that. And I think also that, this is a problem across the country. And the other issue, which I haven't written here, but is about people placed out of area.
Yes.
And actually, she had, the Jersey courts reviewed her progress every 6 months, but she didn't have a mental health worker she had one at the start, and they came to a couple of the CPA meetings, and then she didn't have anyone. And in fact, it was the court that had to pressure them to actually come up with a name when it was coming up to the sort of discussions about discharge. So there was no, and I've never had any contact from Jersey Mental Health, never. And I haven't actually had the energy there's issues to address there, but I haven't had the energy to do that because I've been focused on other things. So, I think people out of area, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. What do people that could inquire about what policies are in place, what do they actually do? They never spoke to Marion before a CPA. They didn't attend most of the CPAs during lockdown. So there was no sort of checks and balances from an outside agency. And obviously it was Jersey was paying for this provision, a specialist forensic provision. And I'm sure it's the same for other people placed out. It was just lucky that I lived relatively near.
Yes.
So that I could visit her as well, because she would have been isolated.
Karen, thank you so much
right.
for all of the evidence you've given. I don't have any further questions for you at this stage. Is there anything I've not covered that you'd like to address?
I just wanted to say because Mariam's death wasn't included in the original dates, and then I found out about it, and I thought it was very important because this is a specialist service run by EPUT.
Yes.
And that actually, most people will have just been in psychiatric hospitals that are coming to this inquiry. And I just thought it was important to raise that specialist services also fall down.
Yes.
That they provide, albeit, there are quite a few positives about Brockfield House. I did feel that, but, scratched the surface and all was not completely well, unfortunately.
And we're very grateful to you
Thank
for
you.
having brought it to our attention.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Chair, do you have any further questions?
I don't, no.
Sarah, please can we have the photograph on screen? We'll now show a photograph of your sister Marion.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
Karen, we will now have a 10-minute break to see if there are any further questions. If there aren't any, that concludes your evidence and you'll be free to leave.
Yeah.
Thank you again so
Thank
much
you.
for the evidence you've given today.
Thank you.
And if there are no questions, it's 10 o'clock.
10 o'clock tomorrow, yes.
Thank you.